Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon, and thank you for joining us. This week, we're going to... So following up last week in our conversation of dead consoles, we hinted at some things that, like my love forever of City Heroes, and thought we'd spend some time this week chatting about how modern gaming is often influenced on how you connect with it, and the idea of what happens when a server dies, when a game updates to a newer version and that old version doesn't exist anymore, and the kind of interesting things that split off and the life cycle of it as a whole.
Absolutely. Because, for one thing, you have games that are entirely online, and so they live or die, quite honestly, by that server support. Some have sort of an additional multiplayer aspect. We mentioned in our last episode, Uncharted having its own multiplayer server that, people might mourn at as it's gone, but it's not as big of a deal. Or something like Metal Gear Solid 3 when they released the updated re-release Subsistence.
Yeah.
There was a Metal Gear Online that, you can't do anymore. You could get some exclusive pieces for it, some exclusive camouflage. And there again, there's some interesting things of once those pieces come down, you can no longer have a complete file, which is its own interesting thing.
One of my favorite YouTubers, Gerard, the completionist, he has completed many a game on his channel, and one of the more recent ones he did, I think, around the time the new Ghostbusters movie came out, is he did the Xbox 360 Ghostbusters game, and when he completes games, he completes them. Like, he beats the game, he gets all the achievements, all the DLC, whatever.
He's very thorough.
But with that game, there are online achievements that are absolutely broken. Like, first of all, there is no online community anymore. So if you want to play with someone, you have to direct connect to play online together. But also, some of the achievements are just broken because the servers don't exist anymore. And it was frustrating because he always completes everything. But in this, he couldn't. And it's that idea also that, certain things, either the community dies because it dies or the game as a whole is killed. We see this a lot on MMOs, your World of Warcrafts, your EverQuests, and so on and so forth. I'm a big World of Warcraft fan, and they constantly update it. And I played Legion for a very long time, or perspective, I guess, is not as long as I might have thought I would. But, a game like that's been around forever and continues to exist, whereas other games like City of Heroes, which I've mentioned several times now, is one of the definitive superhero MMO experiences. And the servers were killed many years ago now. I don't even remember exactly when. But once the support stopped for the game, you were able to even get it to free to play for a very long time on Steam and download a version of it that included all the expansions. But once they brought down the servers, you can no longer play it. You can re-download the game. You can't patch it. You can't play it. And so effectively, that game is dead because there is no way to play it. But in other aspects, certain other games, even though the original experience of the game dies or they patch it beyond what it originally was, some people go out of their way to create fan versions of the game that support the original versions.
Absolutely, which brings me to my formative MMO, EverQuest, one that I put many, many years into, and many, many alt characters, but that's by the by. Nowadays, they are on something around their 21st expansion, I want to say. They've had a great deal of them, and this creates a dynamic gaming experience, and they've sort of taken it in stride that they are no longer the subscription powerhouse they were in their first years. So they've made it more solo-friendly in its way, in the use of mercenaries, which soloing with a mercenary, moloing, or yes, and how certain ways you can group and help people out well outside your level and in that sort of rush and race to max level, which is something that I certainly have certain ideological difficulties with, which I'd love to talk about in a future episode. But the fact is, the game of EverQuest, the content of EverQuest as it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is no longer around. And some people bemoan that. And some of it's rose-colored glasses. Some of it is truly the game changed one way or the other. I remember in the early days of EverQuest, feeling a sense of wonder and awe and danger. Never in any MMO, in a lot of games since then, have I felt the same sense of wandering around. Anything could potentially, okay, I'm safe around here. I know those things are okay. Oh my God, what is that? and running from it and fleeing from it, or just getting gored by a unicorn because I didn't realize it was there. That thing was high level when you in that area. But what people have done is create a lot of servers in order to support that classic experience. Now, some people do this to create new experiences within the game, essentially mod servers. But two in particular that I think of are Project 1999 and the Alcobor Project. Now, Project 1999 takes its name from the time period of which EverQuest had only a few expansions, and there's sort of amongst the community the idea of classic EverQuest really is those three pieces: EverQuest, the Ruins of Kunark, and Scars of Velius. And these were the things that happened. They were little expansions, little changes before some big ones. So people just look at it as like, the idyllic early days. And you still have to work within an EverQuest client, and there are still certain changes that you can't undo, but they cap off as much as they can and make it as genuine to the original experience as possible. You can't quite get the old UI back up or anything like that, but it still maintains certain amounts of the challenge. And having played it, it certainly matches up to my memories, and I do definitely keep that same sense of danger in it. I know a little more about the world now, so it's not as much, but there is still a certain sense of I'm not sure what's going on, and there's a lot more consequence to my action. And the Alcobor project is based off of the Alcobor servers, which were Mac only. When EverQuest came out for the Macintosh, and as a lifelong Mac user, I rejoiced hard, it was concurrent with where the PC servers were. Then, after the first few updates, they stopped updating the Mac server, and PC kept going on. And what first was an annoyance then became a boon, because we had a classic experience that people were bemoaning no longer having on the PC, which then led to people actually, getting like G4 cubes and Mac minis and trying to figure that out. People trying to game from the PC on Mac games on the PC. Shoes on the other foot for a little while there, I guess.
Yeah.
And it led to an interesting thing as well that I was telling Matt about before we began recording this episode, that certain game-changing events that could be triggered had all been triggered on the PC version because they were new, people didn't know what would happen. In particular, the Sleeper, a dragon that when all of its guards were destroyed, it would awaken. Now, instead of being a respawnable fight, this triggered an event where that dragon would rampage across the continent, destroying anybody that got in its path, including permanently killing some NPCs as well, and then it would no longer respawn. And so it was sort of you can't re-sleep the sleeper. You can't unawaken it. And the Mac servers, because they popped up like 2 or 3 expansions after this, people didn't want to wake up the sleeper. They wanted to get the loot that was lost when those NPCs were killed permanently. And up until the final few weeks, I can't confirm right now off the top of my head whether or not they did, but until the end of the servers, the sleeper slept. And that was a unique piece of the identity, and that was a funny little thing. But as things do, the server finally, they set the sun on it and off it went. And now I can no longer do that, which is why the Alcobor server exists, trying to recreate that experience. Now, the gray area of legality with all this does call into question, but it is something of trying to reclaim these experiences that, in a way, have been taken away from us because they shut the door.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, the first MMO I ever played probably that I paid for was City of Heroes, but shortly thereafter I did get into World of Warcraft as well. I started, I'd say, in the mid-cycle of the vanilla version, the original boxed version. Started then and have played it since on and off. I've played every single expansion that's come out either during its release or after its release. And they've made lots of changes since day one to now. Some good, some bad, but overall I like what the game's become. There are purists who loved the vanilla version of World of Warcraft to death. And, the way it was set up, the way it played. And for a very long time, there were quite a few vanilla WoW servers that existed. But one of the largest ones, that I'm blanking on the name off the top of my head, was recently shut down by Blizzard. Blizzard pretty much said we had to shut it down. We feel like it's taking away from our experience. If we wanted people to still play that game, that would be the game that's out. But we've evolved past that. And for legality and other reasons, they had to bring it down. And it's a shame. I mean, I personally didn't like the vanilla version of WoW. I quite hated it. I've liked all the changes they've made. Some are better, some are worse, but all in all, the classes that I want to play have benefited from those changes, and ultimately, once they balance everything, which usually takes a patch or two. So I never really was attached to that, but there was this huge outrage when Blizzard shut down that server because they felt there was no reason to shut it down. And it's a really hairy gray area, especially as a player, a professional player, I would say, because I don't make games or sell them. It's a really weird gray area to be in where you like this thing that doesn't exist. I actually played, speaking of legacy servers, Star Wars Galaxies, which eventually got shut down. For a while, there was a fan-made server, which may still be running. I stopped playing it, that played pre-major patch of that game where the weapon trees were still there, the multi-class trees were there, and all of that stuff. And I played that version for a long time. It may still be running. I'm honestly not sure, but I eventually got tired of it. But that's another game where major changes were made. Nobody liked the major changes, so everyone wanted to play an older version of the game. As far as sunsetting on MMOs, there are plenty of MMOs that barely make it a few years. Sometimes they'll shift to free to play to try and continue to survive, but sometimes that's not even enough.
Right, and it's sort of an interesting self-defeating cycle where some people don't necessarily want to jump onto a game or try it out because, well, it'll probably fail and it'll probably just fall if it doesn't have enough support on it in the first place. But also thinking on long runners, going back to EverQuest era, one of the other games that came out around that time, certainly this was pre-World of Warcraft, and so it was sort of the wild frontier of the 3D MMO.
Yeah.
And people are talking about Dark Age of Camelot and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
Asheron's Call.
Sure.
Which is a very interesting one because the servers stayed open for about 17 years. Yeah. They finally shut the servers down January 31st, 2017. And this is very funny to me because I found out about the Alcabor project a couple of months ago, and it got me thinking about some of those other classic RPGs. And again, that sense of like, well, how much of this is nostalgia? How much of this is just like, man, I'm finally getting to play those things with apply knowledge that I've learned over years to early characters and, really do it. And I was like, oh man, yeah, Asheron's Call's another one. And I read about like the skill system they had for it, and it looks fantastic. And I'm like, oh man, that is so awesome. And I was looking this up early March.
Yeah.
And so I had this wonderfully terrible moment of, wow, I missed the boat of 17 years by a month.
By a month.
By about a month and a half. That's, not paying your bill, 40 days past due, receiving several warnings, then calling on day 41 being like, but I was going to pay it. Can't you just give me one more day?
Yeah.
You're not going to pay it. But some might. But it was a very interesting thing to go like, well, now I never can.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be some fan servers, but it's like that supported experience is gone. It's because I am a retro collector. I am often a generation behind on consoles. This generation, I'm actually up to date. But for the longest time, I was always a generation behind. So these times where the console, the game, the community was in its wane because it would flare up or not last a long time, I never get to play them.
Yeah. Well, and this isn't just exclusive to MMOs. It's just where we see the last release, we were talking about how consoles die and that ultimately they never really do if you're still playing them. MMOs, it's a different story. Just to mention it one more time, the reason I lament City of Heroes so much is because other superhero MMOs have come out with that don't even come close. And this one, the sun set on it. They unplug the servers. You cannot play anymore. Maybe there's a fan server, and there are actually some other superhero MMOs that are in the very early alpha stages that are pretty terrible, but have developers from those other games. So I'm hopeful. But, this also happens with console games as well. You can miss the boat completely or even partially. I mean, thinking about Halo 1 and how that was the only reason the original Xbox Live servers stayed on for as long as they did into the life cycle of the Xbox 360 is because people still played Halo and didn't want to give up playing that online, or Halo 2, either or. And then there are games where, like for me, I bought the new Battlefront for PS4 and I was really excited about it, even though there was no single player, because I heard the online multiplayer was at least a lot of fun. But because I bought it like 6 to 8 months after everyone else did, one of my friends still played. Shout out to Geoff Marriott. We would play online together. But besides the two of us playing together, nobody was playing that game.
I mean, I ran into that with 3DS games.
Yeah.
I found on clearance, big surprise why they were on clearance, Zelda Triforce Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, both Matt and I are already quite avowed Zelda fans, as we've spoken on here before. And I love Zelda Four Swords. I love any of those sort of Zelda experiences. And I certainly felt like, well, there's a single-player experience to this. I should be able to figure this out. Okay, I figured it out, but it's really not all that fun. I could see why you need multiple people for it and where the fun would come in for it.
Yeah.
But there's really nobody. And I could see why I spent only $15 on that new copy.
Yeah.
Same goes for World of Final Fantasy, another series that I've spoken many of its praises, and I love it honestly.
Yeah,
And
that was one that I was actually really interested in checking out. A lot of my friends had it in the beginning, but that came out around the same time as Monster Hunter, which more of my friends were playing. So I bought Monster Hunter, which actually still has a pretty active community on the 3DS for now, until they make one for the Switch, I suppose. But I did encounter the same thing. Unless I was playing with my friends locally, it was still kind of hard to play Monster Hunter. There weren't a ton of random people playing. It still had a community, but it's definitely harder if you get a game not upon release that has a multiplayer element that's a big part of it. You can fall behind.
Well, and that's also a big selling point for those games.
Yeah.
Like, you want to play multiplayer? Well, then you better be part of the community. Buy it when it comes out.
Yeah.
If you get Splatoon right now, you're not going to get as good of an experience as if you had bought it right when it came out.
Especially since they've already started promoting Splatoon 2 for the Switch.
Which I just might get.
Oh, it looks really interesting. I mean, a brief aside on Splatoon, I never got to play it because I didn't have a Wii U, but all the videos I've watched on it looks like a lot of fun, and honestly, I hate most modern war shooters. Like, the reason I got into first-person shooters at all is because of games like Mass Effect, which is third-person, and Borderlands, which was first-person, but it was different, or Left 4 Dead, which was first-person, but it was co-op. Those kinds of games brought me in. And so to see a third-person shooter where you're running around as a kid who can turn into a squid to spray paint, I'm like, all right, this is a new concept. I'll try this.
Yeah, it's a territory game that plays out very differently, has a different set of strategies, since that sense of first-person shooter is not itself a genre. First-person is a delivery method of an experience, and unfortunately, there's just sort of like the war shooter as it has existed, which is unfortunate. Because
it's actually kind of hilarious that very recently Call of Duty announced they're going back to World War II for their next game. And that's because the last Modern Warfare game tanked comparatively to the others because it's like the 8th one they've done.
Yeah, there just comes a point. And it's very funny to see people get excited about that. Not because they shouldn't be excited about it, but it's just kind of that's where it all started in a lot of ways. Like, I think of Medal of Honor, and I think of those too.
Yeah, sure. They were huge competitors for each other for a long time, Call of Duty, Medal of Honor. Mm-hmm. And then I think Medal of Honor had a resurgence a few years back when they tried to do a modern game as well. But yeah, it's interesting to see how those gaming communities die versus, no one shut down those servers for some of them, but people just stopped playing them. Like, older games for sure. Like, you can't play the Mario Kart on the Wii anymore online, or Smash Brothers on the Wii online anymore because they turned those servers off. Whereas other online games still have support and probably will continue to. What I'm curious about actually with the Switch, just talk about that a little more because it's kind of changing certain aspects of gaming. When Mario Kart 8 comes out, the deluxe version, is there cross-platform online with the Wii U? Probably not. But that'd be kind of cool if there was, if you could play between both consoles.
Absolutely.
And I think, there's a lot of interesting movements to do cross-platform to save servers for PC and console. Like, can't remember what game it was, but now there's a rumor that an upcoming PlayStation 4 game is also going to be cross-platform with the PC and effectively the Xbox, since Xbox One and PC are essentially the same online servers. And that's interesting to me because that's never been done before.
Right.
Like, will that perpetuate the life cycle of the game? Because now that you have it on PC as well as those consoles, as long as the PC version continues to exist, the other ones will survive.
Yeah, and I suppose you can maintain the servers of a PC game a lot longer than you can any console game.
Right, because it's just an upgrade of the server setup where it's not reliant on the hardware of the console it's attached to.
Absolutely, which is an interesting thing. I mean, you have your genres that sort of rely on human opponents, and you can maybe have local multiplayer take you only so far in some ways. Like fighting games, I could see why you would want an online component to it.
Sure, of course.
For the whole time. I mean, granted, it has its origins in arcade local multiplayer, and tournaments and everything else are really going to be your big bread and butter for those sort of experiences, because it's just sort of where its origins lie, and where sort of like the primal experience for many people lie. But you're gonna want online, because you can only beat up your little brother at whatever game you're playing so many times.
Sure. I mean,
Chris.
I think that also there's something transcendent about the fighting game genres, specifically because even though the online multiplayer is where a lot of the focus is now, there's still huge in-person tournaments for these console games. Like, I mean, Street Fighter V and Street Fighter IV are defined by their console versions. Like, arcade versions came out, but it wasn't about the arcades at this point. It's about the console versions, and those are the tournament editions that were played.
Absolutely. And it's that thing of like, well, of course you're going to have live tournaments. Not really. You can still have online leaderboards, and those are where, like in something like Splatoon, had much more of those sort of competitions without having in-person competitions. But fighting games, there is still a strong person-to-person, and many shooters as well, person to person, regardless of whatever server you're going through, being able to have that little extra touch, and that never fully goes away, I don't think.
No, me neither. And I think that as far as MMOs go, it's really tough to compete when you're asking upfront for someone to pay for your game additionally, besides the putting the price down. And we're running into that a bit with online support for Xbox and PlayStation for paying for those services too. But like for with World of Warcraft, there's an understanding that you pay for the expansion and then you pay the $15 a month, but also they're going to patch it 3, 4, and 5 times with brand new content and additions that come with that price.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, certainly one of my big disappointments as a PS4 owner was realizing that having a PS Plus membership did not exclude me from paying for a subscription to Final Fantasy XIV.
Correct, yeah. And that's frustrating because people playing Final Fantasy XIV on the PC only have that monthly cost and nothing else.
It's in addition. There's not even a discount or anything going on with it. You just pay.
Yeah.
And
it was the same with DC Universe Online for the PS3 and for the Xbox 360. If you played it online, there was a free to play option, but if you played the paid version, you were paying for your online subscription for PlayStation as well as that game.
Yeah, and I don't know. There comes a point where, look, I'm happy to pay for a gaming experience. I'm happy to pay a little extra for a premium gaming experience. There is exorbitant costs.
Sure. And I think, but there also, like, if there was an offer for a fan server to pay to play City of Heroes again, I absolutely probably would, because it's one of those experiences I long to still do, and something that's kind of a sadness attached to how focused online gaming is and how the in-person experience is less important, is the fact that if you focus on the online experience and then it ends, or they close the server, or they discontinue the game's done. We touched on this a bit last time with the DRM and all of the digital gaming, is at least with physical stuff that doesn't have an online component. Like, you can still get together with your friends, an N64, 4 controllers, pop in GoldenEye, and shoot each other to your heart's content.
Or Mario Kart 64, which Mario Kart is a very powerful game in my home.
Yeah.
We do play a bit of Mario Kart Wii, and there is... Honestly, I don't know if I would ever play Mario Kart online. I would rather have people in my home playing it with me, because there is a great amount of trash talking that just needs a personal touch to it. I need to be able to nudge the person next to me. I need to know that we're all playing the same ridiculous game. I need to be able to yell pretty directly or get yelled at pretty directly for the items that we use. There's just something about it.
That's me with Smash Brothers as well. I had the same experience. Like, the first one I played online was the 3DS one, because the Wii one was trash online. And I liked playing online. I'd play with a bunch of my friends, but we couldn't talk to each other. We couldn't, like, nudge. It took forever to type out a message. And so, like, the fact that the Wii U has the kickstand and
the Switch.
The fact that the Switch has a kickstand, and the fact that you can use, likely, each part of the controller is one controller, so you could get 2 Switches in a room with 4 controllers, essentially, that come with the system, and play locally multiplayer, would be a lot of fun. And you'd have 2 screens to watch. I think would be really great. Or the idea that if you buy multiple controllers, you can sync them up to one system and do that.
Absolutely.
On the go. That's more interesting to me, and that's not, stifled by the online community. But when you have a game like Battlefront, where, there is no single player, the online is what it's about, and the community's already moved on to the next online multiplayer game. Think about your Halos also. Like, I really liked what was the Halo that was the first Halo that 343 Studios did? Halo Reach. So Halo Reach, I think, has one of the best multiplayer experiences of any of the Halo games. And when they re-released Halo 1 on the 360 with that multiplayer system, but all the old maps, it was a ton of fun. And I enjoyed that. And I don't really have this need to go back to previous experiences of the Halo games. But then, of course, when Halo 4 and Halo 5 came out, well, those are the new multiplayer experience. We're stopping supporting the other multiplayer experiences. And I'm like, but I don't want to play that.
Which is sort of paying the subscription fee in its own way. You're just paying it all up front.
Right. Or the idea that, like, there was a homebrew that you could patch on your Wii on an SD card for Smash Brothers Wii to play it like Smash Brothers on the GameCube, which is, in tournament style, considered the definitive version.
Absolutely.
And the fact that you would create a hack to install into the Wii just to play the older version, it's interesting that while companies and developers are happy to move on and make improvements, and a lot of the fans are too, there is always a core base of gamers that like the original the way it was and don't really want it to evolve. And I wonder why that happens. Because me, as a gamer who likes evolution and change, for the most part, I don't mind the newest versions of Smash Brothers and Mario Kart. Sure, Double Dash kind of stunk. But beyond that, like Mario Kart 7 and 8, I really liked. And I don't mind that evolution. But that said, I will always be down for a game of Mario Kart 64 because it does feel like the definitive version to me sometimes.
And that's the thing. By releasing a new version and not having to worry about servers or anything, nothing is tarnishing your experience of playing Mario Kart 64. You're not going to boot up the game and suddenly it plays differently unless your cartridge or N64 has sustained some sort of damage.
Right.
But we actually touched on this a little bit in previous, I think it was last episode, when we mentioned the Final Fantasy VII remake. And
Yes.
I said that they can change as much or as little as they want because I can still pop in a copy of Final Fantasy VII on my PS1 and play it. It might change on the Steam version. It might change for whatever else, but like you can still play it.
Yeah.
But by shutting down a server or losing a previous iteration of a game by patching it over like that, you are removing your ability to go back and play that.
No, for sure.
And so there is a certain amount of maybe territoriality and ownership or refusal to change or just simply opinion and enjoying that version more. But the fact that it is being taken away from you. You can no longer play City of Heroes.
Correct. Yeah. At this point, like normally we'll talk about our personal experience with a topic and how it applies to us. But it's clear if I had to pick a game I missed the most that had online play, it would probably be City of Heroes.
And an interesting thing as well is a big one that we have kind of avoided entirely, Pokemon.
Yes.
Which is another one that was built entirely around eventual multiplayer.
Yeah.
You can play the single player campaign for every game by yourself, and that's fine. And I've done that, and I enjoy that. But even from Red and Blue or Red and Green, if you're going by the original releases, they were made so that you could link up and battle another human being, even on those handheld systems. And then servers started happening, like on the DS.
Yeah.
And there are things lost, not just the fact that they no longer have the DS server, so you can't battle in Platinum or Black and White with somebody else over the internet, only local play, but in, I believe it was Black and White where they had the Dream World. I think it was in Gen 5 where they released the Dream World. And when they closed the servers, you could no longer get Dream World Pokemon, which meant there was a premium on being able to trade those Pokemon. Did you want a Ditto with its Dream World ability? Actually making it slightly tournament viable, well, good luck.
Yeah.
And there's something there, much like we spoke of at the beginning of this episode about the completionist. And certain things, you lose out on the original experience, but not the entire experience. But the update of sort of a tournament listing and everything else within Pokemon, mechanics change. The Pokemon list changes.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the Pokemon themselves change. Not necessarily as much or as little, but you can still go back and play the single-player versions, and I'm sure you could still have local tournaments of those games.
Sure.
But
also, it's interesting because then even Nintendo tried to circumvent that by creating a server, a bank where you can store your Pokemon from, I believe, DS generations on, whatever could connect to the internet.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely a matter of, you could probably trade up. I think at this point, if you've got all the proper hardware and I do. Being able to trade up from Gen 3, I
Yeah.
think. It requires a little bit of maneuvering, and I mean like original Game Boy Advance Gen 3, not the Omega Sapphire.
Right.
Omega Ruby
Essentially,
Alpha
if you
Sapphire.
have a DS with a Game Boy Advance slot, you could trade between the DS, the DS and the DS and the
3DS.
3DS and the Game Boy Advance cartridge, or the DS and the 3DS. It's interesting with Pokemon specifically you mentioned, because that was a game that I never really played for the multiplayer. I mean, I could, but I always played it for the single player experience. I always cared about getting the Pokemon and just leveling them up. So it's interesting to hear that, because I didn't even think of that.
Whereas some people build their entire teams and they play their entire game. They zoom through the single player campaign, and then they build their teams entirely around human opponents. There are moves, there are builds, there are ideas that in a single player campaign, why would you even do that? That makes no sense. You know, you don't use things like Growl or Swords Dance or any of those in single player, because you don't need to alter your stats that much. You just get some stab damage, you get some whatever else. Some strategy does play into it.
Right.
And there is still some, tense battles, but it's not the same thing. You don't, playing through Sun and Moon, I finally encountered a trainer that in their AI used Stealth Rock and Whirlwind.
Yeah.
To force that level of damage, and use those sort of strategies that you typically only see in human multiplayer, in person to person. And so there is that whole community that exists, but the game itself, while the single player experience never goes away.
Yeah.
And with updates here and there, the multiplayer and aspect of the game changes. Is it the same game as it came out? No.
Yeah.
And it never can be. But the game can live on somehow. It is not a wholesale thing where it's Battlefront, where there's only the multiplayer experience,
Right.
which is why Battlefront 2 does seem pretty exciting.
Right, because it does seem like there's a single-player campaign. We shared the new trailer on the Facebook page.
A little while ago, yeah.
And, I would love a single player in that. It's what I loved about the first Force Unleashed, is there was this new Star Wars story. It was fun to play. And, Battlefront, the multiplayer was fun to play, but that fun only lasted so long. And think about it. If the PS4 servers ever shut down, which I imagine at some point in the far future they will, that game retains zero value because you cannot play it. There are like single player like training missions, but there's like a couple of hours worth of that. There's literally no reason to play that game, and that's why it's dangerous to release a game like that. And only a few games have come out that way that only had multiplayer experience that were on a console. PC, it happens all the time. There are tons of multiplayer-only games that live and die by whether they have support or their servers go down.
And it's a little easier, I suppose, with PC or with digital distribution to not have to worry as much about a price point for those games as well, because I'm happy you're paying a smaller premium for a game that is online only because of that knowledge. Being able to pay a little more, your usual console release price for something that has a strong multiplayer aspect, but also a single player game that, the heat death of the servers in its way, that you can then go and still have an experience with the game. You can revisit it, you can replay it, and even have a little local multiplayer if you want to, if you find somebody who wants to play the game with you.
Yeah. And also, like, some games have found new life in getting an online MMO style facelift. I mean, think about Team Fortress 2, which still sold pretty well as far as Steam games go, and it was fairly cheap. But when they made it free to play, you get the whole game, which is essentially just playing the multiplayer for nothing. And then you could buy hats and augmenters and other stuff that you would spend money on. And they actually make more money on the game now that way, because community kind of got revitalized by this and making it, free to play and changing that mechanic of the game actually breathed new life into this online game.
Yeah, you didn't require a subscription fee out of everybody, but you put enough little carrots out there, some people will pay for all of them.
Yeah. And I'm always curious what other people's pain points are with online gaming, especially MMOs, because there have been many MMOs to come and go. Guild Wars 2, Rift, a WildStar had a very short lifespan before it became free to play.
Oh goodness, yeah.
The Old Republic, all of these games that we thought were going to change the face of MMO gaming and still can't defeat the juggernauts. For the longest time, people thought WoW was going to die out to EverQuest or EverQuest 2, because EverQuest and Sony was the leader in online multiplayer games, and then eventually it just couldn't keep up. And so I'm curious, if you're listening to this, what your pain points with online games are both console and MMOs, or if there's a game that's no longer around that you really wish you could still play. I mean, they're remastering StarCraft now, for God's sakes, which, like, I own the original StarCraft, which they now give away for free, but I still have the discs for that.
Wow.
It's registered to my Blizzard account because I still had the discs when Blizzard, when Battle.net.com became a thing. And so I'm curious what other people's experiences with those games were like, how they shut down Diablo 2 servers.
I was actually just about to bring that up. Speaking of Blizzard, I am a very big Diablo fan.
Yeah.
And so when Diablo 3 came out and there was the online only and the backlash against that, and most of my Diablo 3 experience has been entirely local multiplayer because I only play on console. But it's also because my origins are in that. My copy of Diablo is for the PS1.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but that also had local multiplayer, and I enjoy the fact that I can now do a 2-player Diablo and not have to worry about it, not have to worry about servers or any of that.
Sure.
The resolution's a little different, it plays a little different, but honestly, it's a really fun experience, and I can keep doing it, and I can drag you into that. I can drag anybody into that. You want to play the rogue? I don't care. And so Diablo 3, it's an interesting thing of, yes, it's also security as well.
Yeah.
And yet
it's still online only, which is fine. I mean, I really enjoyed Diablo 3, even though a lot of people abandoned it sooner rather than later. I know that the new expansion was supposed to improve it. I haven't gotten it yet.
Crusader's a lot of fun.
But yeah, it's interesting. So I'm just curious what other people have experienced with online gaming. Also, because younger gamers have always had online gaming, whereas, older gamers like us, there was a time where you couldn't play online. And so I'm curious, tell us what your favorite dead or dying MMO or console multiplayer game is and why. And do you wish that it could live on, or are you glad it died? I mean, like, I clearly have pain points about City Heroes dying, but like Champions Online, which I think is dead now, which is another superhero MMO.
It's certainly in stasis, if nothing else.
It was terrible, so I could care less.
And you do not get bonus points for mentioning Sega Channel. You get you get the exact amount of points everyone else does, but
yes.
But that's another one of those. I would love to talk about those sort of ideas in a later episode. Again, those ahead of their time things.
Right, things that were too big for their britches, as it were.
And it's interesting now to see the multiplayer communities that rise and fall just because there are so many of them. And we also only have so much time in the day.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Like, I don't, playing World of Warcraft recently for Legion compared to when I first played and raided all the time, I have no time to raid anymore. Like, if I'm on and the guild wants a noob to come along, I'm happy to play. But, like, I can't invest 8 hours a week, 4 hours a night, 2 nights a week on raiding. Who has the time for that?
That's one of the reasons I fell out of EverQuest. I never got to high level raiding because I enjoyed exploring the world. I enjoyed pickup groups and everything else, but I could never put in the time for raiding. I was a high school, college musician. I had too many practices to go to. I had too many everything else. So
yeah,
but it's interesting.
It is definitely interesting. Thank you for taking the time, of course, to listening. As always, you can find us most places on the internet as Fun and Games Pod. Twitter, Instagram, email us funandgamespod@gmail.com. Please email us your suggestions for topics, ideas, just to say hi. Please comment online. We are on iTunes and Google Play, as well as hosted on Libsyn. We want to make this an interactive community, as gaming should be. So if you have suggestions for future topics or want to chime in on this one, please comment somewhere on the internet for us.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. This has been Fun and Games. Once again, I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.